Episode one was awesome. Launched that a couple weeks ago. And we decided to switch gears for this month's podcast and talk a little bit about mental health since May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So, what we wanted to do right off the top is just kind of talk a little bit about our experience, some things that we have been through, and just some tips and tricks that we picked up along the way. We are not mental health professionals, so this is just from our perspective between us as leaders and have growing up through the staffing and sales industry. Um, One thing that I did want to mention and kind of bring up that when I thought about mental health awareness, and one thing that has always plagued me, and I know some of us here too, throughout our careers, is a non-compete, right? And something that just weighed so heavy on my mind, and whether I can leave, whether I can't leave, what does that mean if I, want to make a move or something like that. And funny enough, a couple weeks ago, the big announcement came out that there is a ruling that there was a ban that's coming, for non-competes. And yesterday, the FTC made a final rule that as of September of this year, it is official that non-competes will be banned in the U.S.
Oh,
So,
I didn't
yeah,
see
that
that.
just came out yesterday, hot off the press. So
Yeah,
that
breaking
is
news.
huge relief for so many people, within our industry, within sales. So I wanted to kind of pick your brains about that and see what your thoughts are. Sarah has a huge smile, so let's let's start
Well,
there.
I recruit salespeople, so I've dealt with it myself in my career, but also every time I talk to sales candidates, I have to have that conversation because, you know, all the sales roles I work are people going within the same industry. Like you work for one med device, you're going to another med device. And so um, it would just be nice to not have to worry about that. It's rare that I've honestly had it ever be a deal breaker. Like there's been a few instances where, you know, the client has had to send it to their legal team to review, but I feel like for the most part, there's a bigger emphasis on non-solicitation versus a non-compete because I feel like they're bullying tactics. Like unless you're working at a company that's actually like inventing something or you have a patent
Mhm.
or, you know, something that truly is like an innovation, for the most part, some of these, whether it's a recruiting firm or like a marketing agency, we're all doing the same things. Like
Right.
I've worked at a number of recruiting companies. I've never been shown something that I was like, wow, I can't believe this is happening here. No one can know that we're doing this. So to me, it feels like you're just trying to hurt someone's livelihood. Like no one's going to spend 10 years in one industry and then just give that all up because you don't want them to go work somewhere. So that's my 2 cents.
I mean, I agree. So like when it comes to like mental health and non-competes, I think the thing that's is tough is you work somewhere for so long, you do a great job, you have great relationships with people, and you leave for an opportunity you think to kind of better your career. And when you leave and then you instantly get sent a letter, it's like those relationships that you thought you had that were strong, you did everything the right way. Now they're trying to prevent you from furthering your career, which to me is just like, I could never do that to someone. If someone, if one of our employees told us, like, hey, I got this opportunity that's going to really help me set up my family for success, like, I'm never going to get in their way. I would never send somebody a letter or do something that could, hurt their livelihood. And, someone who has firsthand experience with this, it mentally wears on you, right? Like, you have to worry day in and day out. Like, one, is your new company going to let you go because
Mm-hmm.
now you're bringing them your baggage from you leaving and your old company trying to come after you. So like mentally, it's taxing on you. And then it's just like, you look back like on the relationship you had, you think like, wow, did they truly care about me, or was I just an employee number that made them a ton of money? So that part is really tough as well. So I mean, that's kind of my 2 cents on, and I could go on about non-competes for days. I mean, I think they're ridiculous. I think people, like, as long as you're not like leaving, like it's not like you left your company on a Friday and you had this big temp book of business that like all that revenue just transferred to your new company. If like that happened, I would say by all means, you should be able to kind of go after them. But if you're a perm recruiter, your business is mostly contingent, the company that you're at is still working with those companies, but the company wants to also work with you, because newsflash, they don't work with people because they, represent a company. It's for the person that they're working with and they've enjoyed working with. So like,
Right.
over, the last handful of years, I mean, I've lost out on some relationships just because I didn't want to even try to go down that route of like talking to someone that I previously talked to, just because I don't want to deal with the legal ramifications of what would happen if that was the case. So, yeah.
Yeah. I have a slightly different perspective on it, right? Like I agree with both of you. I think that they're kind of ridiculous. I was very, very happy with the ruling, and I was excited to see that roll out yesterday, that it's like officially official. Um, I always thought that it was interesting in our field, and I've talked to other sales professionals that have, moved jobs in different companies and had to sign non-competes. But I always think it's interesting when you're hired by an organization and they know that you have a non-compete from your current employer. But if you then leave that company, they use it as a fear tactic against you.
Mm,
Does that make sense? Like I
yeah.
have been in that situation where I was hired by a firm, leaving my old firm, and I have a non-compete. And they're like, don't worry about it. It's fine. It's not an issue. It's okay. Come on board. They sweet talk me. I go and I join. And then it doesn't work out for whatever reason. And I go to make a transition. And in my exit interview, it's brought up like, hey, just remember you signed a non-compete and you can't do XYZ. We're going to send you a letter in the mail. And I'm like, I don't understand what's happening here, because when we talked 2 years ago or 3 years ago, you hired me from the other place when
Yeah.
like it wasn't an issue. So now it's an issue and you're using it as a fear tactic against me to, like Chris said, affect my livelihood. So yeah, I don't know why that's a thing. But I think it's going to be interesting what the next couple of years are going to roll out. There's going to be a lot of other, opportunities. They're talking about 200% increase in opportunities that are going to open up and new companies that are going to be started,
Mhm.
because now that veil has kind of been lifted and that fear is gone. So I think that's exciting for what that's going to bring to the market for sure.
Yeah.
And
I think,
also,
oh, go ahead.
I said, I regarding the ruling, I also find it funny that I see a lot of firms out there posting about it, and I know firsthand that a lot of these places have sent letters to people. So it's just, it's funny.
I just think like when like bringing that up in your exit interview again, for example, it's funny to me that, companies want to look like outwardly, yes, like we support everyone in their journey from here on out. Like we just want to see our people happy. But how many times have you had an exit interview where you felt like they really wanted your feedback and really wanted to know why they couldn't retain you? And I think that with non-competes, like that is it's more of a excuse, I feel like, to not focus on retention and to just make people feel afraid to leave. Like if top talent is leaving, then that's something you have to look at internally. People don't leave organizations where they feel treated well and respected and happy. Like they
Especially
leave
in sales
because,
jobs.
Right.
yeah, like if you're doing well and you're making money, but you are not treated well, I've had this decision in front of me before. Like no dollar sign is going to make my mental health withering worth it. Like it's just not. And so I think companies could just do better trying to understand, like, okay, why are we having this issue? Instead of you want a team of people there out of fear instead of like wanting to be there because you're creating a really good culture. So it's just interesting. Like I am curious to see how this all plays out. And I do think it's funny people sharing their opinions knowing what actually happens behind the scenes.
They're the ones sending the letters. I knew of a firm very recently that was laying off recruiters, right? Like the company wasn't doing very well, so they had to do some downsizing. But in that downsizing, they were, informing their employees that they had to let go of their non-competes. I'm like,
That is so
how is
crappy.
that possible? How could you enforce a non-compete if you're letting someone
Yeah.
go? Like you're trying to
Yeah.
force, a mass group of people out of the industry altogether. I just think it's sometimes it's kind of used as not what it's intended for. And like you said
100%.
before, Sarah, like if it's more of a non-solicit type of thing, then yes, that makes sense. But if you're just using it to kind of enforce your power trip a little bit, then the ruling is the
Or
right thing.
or do you not believe in your current team enough that, I've seen that too. Like I've had very junior people be laid off and ask about the non-compete and been told, yes, we're going to uphold this. And that's wild to me. Like if they were so good that you're worried about them being out in the marketplace, why are you letting them go? And are you not
Mm,
confident in your current team to keep, things afloat? Like it just doesn't make sense,
that's a
at
really
all.
good point. Well, let me ask
Anywho.
you this, kind of switching gears a little bit, but along the same vein of, these certain pieces of what we do and even transferable to other industries where it kind of takes a hit on your mental health, even like returning to work, working from home, companies not offering the hybrid schedule anymore. Other countries are now trying to roll out a 4-day work week instead of a 5-day work week
Mhm.
because studies have shown that employees are more productive and they feel more valued and kind of more healthy and better about themselves when they have that actual work-life balance. What do you guys think about that and how it stands in our market right now?
Oh, I mean, I think it's so tricky because like you said, in our specific market, like as recruiters, I mean, we can do our job anywhere. Like it's not I don't think it makes sense to force people back into an office because one, I think people have gotten used to doing this work from home, right? And
Mhm.
when you're going back in the office and you have to adjust to like now there's 20 other people on the phone and people don't know how to handle that anymore. Like when I first started recruiting, I was in a bullpen with like 30 people and we were all on the phone at the same time.
Right.
And when we started to go back after 2020, like it was difficult to manage that because you were so used to like the silence. So I think it creates this like push and pull of like what makes sense and forcing people to go in to then all sit in a conference room on Zoom meetings like just feels silly to me.
Mhm.
But I do think the 4-day work week, this has been talked about a lot in the last couple years. And I have worked with some clients who do have a 4-day work week. And, you know, I think if you are a grown up, right, and you know how to manage your workload, like you can get your work done in 4 days. Obviously, if there's something that arises and you need to be on a Friday call or whatever your day off is, but I think it's more about treating your team like grown-ups and trusting that they know what they need to get done and when they need to get it done. Like I've always taken the approach, especially remote, that we don't all feel productive between 9 to 5. Like I sure don't.
Right.
Like from the hours of 3 to 5, like my kids are getting home from school. I'm so like I do have calls sometimes I have to sneak off and take, but those are my least productive hours of the day. I'm someone that gets online at 7:30 in the morning because everyone's out of the house, like to get an early start and then I'll log
Mhm.
back on at night. And I always would share that with my team. Like, you know what you need to do to get your work done. And I'm trusting you to do that. Of course, sometimes you can give people enough rope to hang themselves and they don't necessarily know how to manage that. And then you can help them through that. But it's a trust thing, I think, to me. Like, do you trust your team to manage their workload well? And if not, then what are you doing to help teach them how to do that? Does that make sense? I feel like I don't know if I
Yes.
answered that
So it
question,
really
but
comes from leadership, right? Like,
yeah.
yeah.
And especially like experienced people in our industry, right? Like if they've been doing it long enough, they know what they have to do to make money, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're
Right.
not doing anything, you're not making money, you're not being able to provide for your family or live the lifestyle that you're used to. So for people that are seasoned professional in this, I mean, your best bet is to kind of just, stay out of their way, let like help them when they need it, but they know what they have to do to be successful. There shouldn't be like I need to know what you're doing between the hours of 8 and 4. Like, no,
Yeah.
they're successful. They do the job, they make money, like just really be there to help them when they need it. For people that haven't done this role before, I think in the beginning it's good to give them kind of a playbook on, how to be successful, and you got to be a little bit more on top of them to help them out. But once they kind of get up and running and they know what they're doing, at the end of the day, I mean, if they're doing the job, but they're spending more time at night because they have, kids home during the day or stuff going on, like that's okay. I mean,
Right.
as long as they're doing what they have to do to be successful. So
I think it also comes down to communication. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I know for me personally, like I want to know my expectations from my leadership. Like, I hate not knowing what's expected of me, or like what they're, I just like to know. I like a little bit more structure there. And so no matter how experienced of a person I am managing or bring on, like I try to be very upfront about here's what I expect. Like, here are the expectations, so that they know, like, they're not set up to fail because they don't know what you expect from them. Do you know what I mean? And I think
Right.
communicating that really clearly and then being consistent about it, like, because I've definitely had scenarios before where people will say like, oh, I don't care if you do that, or, that's totally fine if you do this. But then when I, hop off early, or I take like a PTO day, it's thrown back in my face later.
Mm.
And now you're creating that like relationship where do they not trust me? And now I have fear of asking for time off, right? I have fear of like my light not being green on my Teams or Slack or whatever it is. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I feel like that relationship breaks down, and that affects your mental health, because now you're like questioning everything you're like
Yeah.
asking to do. You know what I mean?
100%. Let me tell you something that you just brought up a really great point, because when we started working from home during the pandemic, that green light anxiety for me
Oh
was
my God.
high through the roof,
I
because
still
I'm like,
can't hear the Slack noise, like gives
if
like my eye twitches.
I'm like, if I step away for like 10 minutes, because at the time, we had a baby during the pandemic. So if I'm like, the baby's crying and I need to jump away,
Yeah.
but like my light goes red, I'm like running back to the computer, like move my mouse around. I'm like, no, I'm still here. I'm still working. That anxiety was high. But I wanted to circle back to one thing, because I think what was interesting over the last, let's say, 5 years, right? Like right before COVID. So for our industry, we were meeting everybody in person.
Mhm.
We were meeting
Yeah.
every single candidate. We were going out, we were doing client visits. Like, we were a very hands-on, in-person, like customer facing type of role for us, right? And it's like multiple people a day. Like, we had
Yeah.
KPIs that we had to hit, right? So there's that anxiety of like, I need to meet 10 people a week. So constantly shaking hands and, all that stuff. And then you go, get thrust into a situation like the pandemic, where you're out of the office for the first time ever. You're actually working from home. Systems don't work right. You don't have the proper equipment to work from home. The VPN's not working. Teams is learning Teams in Zoom and what's best. Like, there was so much stuff that was going on at the same time. And then as leaders, we're trying to figure out how to manage our employees remotely, how to keep them engaged, how to keep, productivity high. We have to keep the revenue flowing. Like, there was so much that was happening all
Giving
at
me
once.
anxiety.
No, it really was. It was super high. And then again, to your point before, Chris, you have kids at home doing remote schooling. We're all here in house, worried about the world, what's going on, and all that great things.
Lights all wiping
all
your
those good things.
bananas.
Right. 100%. But at no point, at zero time, did I ever feel like there was, from a company perspective overall, like they were checking in, or there was a concern about mental health and how we were dealing with all of this, like how we were managing all of it, because there was so much going on at the same time. And I say that from like a higher level perspective, right? My immediate leadership is fantastic, right? It was great.
Right.
If I needed to step away, go to a doctor's appointment, do what I need to do, we did that. But from a corporate structure, there was no structure. and understandable to a certain extent that everybody's kind of dealing with the same thing. So everyone's trying to figure it out. But I think from our situation as middle management, we were just kind of left in the weeds. So my mental health at that point was like all over the place. I'm like, what do I do? How do I keep things flowing? How do I keep the lights on, at work and at home? Like it was so
Yeah.
much. And then from there, slowly moving into, return to work, there was anxiety about that too. Like you're going back to work, what is the office going to be like? Can we sit next to each other? Do we have to sit, 16 feet apart from one another? What's the point in going there?
Right.
At this point, it's been 2 years. And like you said, we figured out how to work from home. And I think right now, being a few years removed from all of that, a lot of companies are like, okay, we can ditch the hybrid, we can ditch the working
Yeah.
from home and get back to the office. But since then, in the last 4 years, people's lives have completely changed, right?
Mhm.
Like their entire worlds are different. How they manage their homes has had to change. So their entire situation is different. So the expectation that because the company is ready for
Right.
5 days, absolutely 9 to 5 in the office every day, that every single candidate is going to be open to that, I think is a little absurd. Like
Yeah.
it's just not
I mean, people
feasible.
were moving, like they were relocating
Right.
because their
Yeah.
company at the time said, whatever, like go ahead. And I've talked to candidates who are looking because now their employer doesn't want them to be remote. And
Right.
like, well, I moved across the country when you said it was okay. And that's just, it's crazy. Like you said, I mean, you want people to flip a switch to go back to normal, but I think they forget the flip was switched for us very quickly the other way, and how overwhelming and stressful was that, right? Like when suddenly we were thrust into a remote world and like all the things that you just said, you're essentially creating the same chaos, just opposite. Like now we're
Mhm.
forcing you back into a mold that we don't really fit anymore.
Right.
So figure it out.
Right. Like
Basically.
it worked
I think
in
you said,
2018.
yeah, something you said though, I feel like especially middle managers, like I've read I've read an article once about middle management, and I think it's the hardest role to be in when you're in a middle manager position, because especially when it comes to your mental health, because you are juggling this, like protecting your team and trying to communicate effectively with your team, but you're not always getting that from your leadership. And so it's really hard to juggle that sometimes, and I think like they're looking to you, and sometimes your leaders are looking to you, but no one's giving you the answers, and it can feel very overwhelming of,
Yeah.
I I don't know the right thing to do here, and I don't really have a lot of direction myself, but I'm required and expected to give my team a lot of direction and, really clear, transparent communication. And I think when you're not getting that, it's really hard. Like it's a really hard place to put on that brave face every day, and act like yeah, everything's great. Like nothing to worry about. We got this. When really, like behind the scenes, you're like, I don't know what's
Things are on
happening.
fire.
Like,
But
yeah, like in that kids movie Inside Out, like everyone in your brain is just like running around screaming, but you're like, everything's fine.
But you think about like, we interview candidates on a daily basis, right? And I would think the common theme, at least for me, on why people are open or looking for a role, it's a lot of it's like, they're fully in office. They want more of like a hybrid or flexible schedule. They're being overworked. The company's not, adding any staff. So they're working like 60 to 70 hours a week, or sometimes just like a toxic environment. It just surprises me that some of these companies that obviously, the owners of the business are smart individuals. They build a business with high revenues, like why they don't take this stuff into account, because their retention would be so much higher. And
Yeah,
you look at it from the flip side, when you lose an employee, like that process of like finding someone new and hiring, it all becomes very costly to them. That like if they just took a step back and said, all right, like, why do we have to be in office 5 days? Why can't we have a more flexible schedule? Or man, like our teams working 60, 70 hours a week. Like, why don't we add a new position? Yeah, it's going to be go towards our bottom line and take money out of our pocket, but it's also going to keep our employees around longer and keep them happy and motivated. So some of those things, it just surprises me that people don't think more about, and it just really hurts them in the long run. So
Yeah.
I mean, even to your point, though, in our specific industry, and I think in a lot of sales roles, it's not a 9 to 5 position, right?
Right.
Like we have clients and candidates that are emailing us and messaging us at 6 a.m. or 10 p.m. at night. And I think our industry, there's an expectation that we're always available, that we will always
Yes.
respond, that we will get right back to you because sense of urgency, right? Time kills all deals, which I hate. I hate that saying so much. But there
I'm
is like
pretty sure
this
I still
over.
say that, but I
I
won't say it to you.
hate it. I hate it. I think I hate it because of who said it to me. But anyway, there is this overarching feeling of like if I don't respond right away, I'm not doing my
Yeah.
job. Right. So there is always this like certain level of stress and anxiety that kind of comes with it. And I think with any job, right, in any industry, there's a certain level of stress that's kind of already built into what you're doing. I think it's more so about how you manage it for yourself and being kind of self-aware. And then it's also, to your point before, Sarah, it's about how it is delivered from leadership, right?
Hmm.
So I guess let me ask you both a question. Have you had positive experiences from your leadership at certain companies where there was clear communication, where you felt like, um, wow, like this is a really healthy space for me to be in. I can do my job effectively and I can lead effectively because I'm seeing that and how it's being presented to me and I can present it back to my team.
You can take this one, Chris.
I mean, I would say yes, I have. I think for me, things that are important that I like, when people take the time to like get to know you, ask questions about you, like your family and personal stuff that you like to do, and like, just every now and then just check in, hey, how's it going? How you doing? How are the kids? Like those types of things kind of, at least to me, matter, and it shows that you they look at you not as an employee number and as more as a human being. And I have been in places where I left where I felt, when I was there, I thought like, hey, I'm a they look at me as like a human and not an employee number. But then when leaving and like no one reaches out to you, checks in with you, and it was just like,
Mhm.
wow, like what it felt like, it was more of I made them a lot of money and they were nice to me when I was there. And then as soon as you're gone, it's like, you're out the door. And for me, like relationships are important. Like I stay in touch with a lot of people that used to report to me or I've worked with, and I'm always kind of checking in with them. And like I think Curtis, you and I had this kind of experience. Like we
Mhm.
we both left a place and like you and I stayed in contact. It wasn't every week, every month, but like we would always check in, see how things are
Yeah.
going, and like those types of things are important, and that's building longer term relationships. And so I know I got a little bit off track, but yeah, I mean I have been in a place where I felt like there was a very positive, I had a positive experience from that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had that, of course. Like, I think especially, there were things that were done at one of my former companies around, around return to office where it didn't feel forced. Like they asked for everyone's opinions, and then they really gave the team the option of like, okay, are you going to be an in-office person, a remote, or a hybrid? And I think the way that that was handled was really helpful because there wasn't an assumption that like everyone's going to have the same answer, or like the same thing is going to work for everyone. And I think that, to me, like what's so important is if you say you're going to do something, then do it. And that could have very easily, you could have said like, this is going to be smooth transition and we want this to work for everyone. But then they could have easily said, well, here's what we're doing. And we're not going to ask what works for everyone. And I do think that's important because, you know, not everyone has the same needs. Like not everyone's in the same situation
Mhm.
in life or, what have you. And so those little small acts like have definitely went a long way. But I've also had, not great experiences where, I I think especially early on as a manager, like I look back to the first person I ever managed and I like cringe so hard because I was such a terrible manager. Like, but because that's all I knew. Like you know, when I came onto the scene, like in recruiting back in the day, it was very like boiler room style and like you were yelling at your people on the floor and it was horrible, but that's what I thought you did. And I think as I matured and like grew up a little bit and realized, that feels so terrible. Why am I doing this to
Mhm.
like the people I'm managing? Like I literally
Right.
am so miserable. Like why am I projecting this on someone else? So I have always tried to, I think, use the things that I really struggled with and I, wished I had had from leadership and tried to really focus on that as a leader.
Yeah.
Um, because you know how that feels, right? Like you know how it feels to not feel like you can have a honest conversation and feel safe about that. Or when you're in the gray all the time and being, not informed, like that stresses me out. Like not having information makes me very anxious. And
Mhm.
I know I've had people who don't like that too. And so I try to over communicate when I can so that people don't feel lost or like, not in the know. So I think it's tough. Like I've definitely had both situations
Uh,
in different ways.
I think one thing you both said was like expectations. I think if you set expectations and you stick to them, that when you have to have conversations that you might not feel as comfortable having, like it makes it easier because you've
Yeah.
been clear and concise the whole time of like, here's what the expectations are. This is how we get there. Like if you're constantly changing things or not sticking to them, then as an employee, like when your boss has that conversation with you, it's reasonable to feel a certain type of way
Right.
because that hasn't been
Mhm.
clear and concise with me. Or like if
Right.
someone tells you, like I've seen it happen where like someone's been told like how great they're doing, and then a week later they're put on a performance plan.
Right.
It's
Right.
like as an employee, like what do you like? Wow, like last week I was great. This week,
Yeah.
because I didn't interview enough candidates. Like I'm now on a performance plan, and then that can
Right.
just like that can haunt you and that can stick with you, and then it kind of is a spiral downhill from there. So
Yeah.
I think it's just key is just being clear and concise. Ask it like don't ask your employees to do something that you're not willing to kind of do yourself. There's nothing more frustrating than like someone getting on you about something and then they're sitting there not doing anything at all. So I mean, I think
Right.
if you set the standard, you be an example, you lead by example, and you set expectations and things, I think it just makes it so much easier to have difficult conversations with someone when it comes to performance or anything within a sales organization.
The other
100%.
thing I'll say to that too is like as a leader, you have to be very accountable. And I feel like oftentimes I've had scenarios happen where, conversations were had or things were said, like Chris was saying, the inconsistency. And then later, it's like that never happened. And consistently that
Mhm.
happens where you're being gaslighted, like honestly.
Mhm.
And then you start to question, like, wait, did that? Like, I remember this conversation or like, and then it really, again, like you don't trust yourself and you start to really question like what is reality because
Right.
it happens over and over again. And I feel like that has always been the hardest thing for me from leadership. Like I'll hold myself accountable, but you have to hold yourself accountable too. And like I can't feel safe to have an authentic conversation with someone who their narrative is always like drastically different than the reality that I remember being in. And I think with my team, I've definitely had to have hard conversations, obviously. Like when you manage people, it happens.
Mhm.
And I think when you have and you think about your intention, like, are you going into this difficult conversation with the intention to figure out what the issue is and, problem solve and like try to find a solution? Or are you going into that conversation to make them feel like crap? And I feel like you can have the same general conversation. It's the way you address a person. Like going into talk to someone who has maybe shared that they're feeling overwhelmed or, just they're struggling for whatever reason. And going in and starting it by, opening a scroll of like everything you've noticed over the last 12 months that didn't go great, or client said this or this happened, but I care about your mental health, so let's figure out how I can help you, versus just leveling with them and saying, hey, like,
Right.
I've noticed you're not yourself. Like, your energy is a little down, your production seems a little down. Like, how can I help? Like, what's going on? What do you feel
Yeah.
comfortable sharing? It's not hard to take that approach, and
Yeah. Yeah.
then make that person feel comfortable having an honest conversation with you. And it doesn't mean that they're going to stay and then turn things around and be a great employee. Like, many times people leave, but at least when that exit happens, it's done in a really good way where you both still have respect for each other and you both, still wish each other well. And I don't know, I think some people really struggle with that, like
Hmm.
just treating people like human beings.
With respect, it's leading
Yeah.
with empathy, right? And I
Yeah.
think I was fortunate enough that I had a really strong leader, a few years back that I still consider a great friend. And, at that point, I was maybe like 7 years into my career, and I had never had a leader that kind of like took me under their wing or
Hmm.
mentored me on how to be a strong leader. I was in my early 20s. Like, I just kind of
Yeah.
figured it out along the way, through my arrogance and my power trips at times, and wanted to be the top guy or whatever. And I'm like, but that's not me. It's not who I am as a person. I just thought that was what was expected of me,
Right.
really. Until I was able to kind of be paired with this leader. I won't call him out, but he knows who he is. And he really taught me like everything from start to finish. Like, he kind of reprogrammed me in terms of how I communicate. And for me, I'm a
Yeah.
very direct person. Like, I'm a very black and white. Like, I'm going to tell you straight. I'm super honest, sometimes to a fault. And he had a way of communicating that was like, I don't know. I was just always in awe. He let me
Yeah.
sit in on meetings. He let me shadow him. He showed me how to do different things and reports, how to actually be a leader. And that's what got me here, right?
Yeah.
Like, literally how I was able to progress in my career was because of him. Um, but he led with empathy. And I didn't even know what that word meant until I was like 28.
Yeah. I know. Same.
Like, what does that mean? But I think that is crucial, right? Like, I wish everybody had a leader like that. I wish everybody had that opportunity. So it made me think, well, how can I be that person for other people? How
Right.
can I, groom someone else and bring them up so that they can kind of have that same feeling and walk away with those same thoughts of me that I had of my former leader. So yeah, I think it's super important that empathy is everything, really.
There's an article a couple months, well, maybe that's just last year, I don't know, but it was either like Forbes or Harvard Business Review, but it was all about mental health in the workplace. And there was something in there that said that like most people would say that their manager has the biggest impact on their mental health. And I
Mhm.
think it's because we spend more time at work than really anywhere else, unfortunately. But you do spend so much time with that person and you want that person's support. You want them to be proud of you. Like, you want them to, validate you. And
Yeah.
I always feel I relate leadership and management a lot to like parenthood, because I just think they're so similar in some ways. Like, obviously children and
They
adults
are.
are not the same, but
They
I feel
are.
like I carry the same responsibility in both roles where, you know, I I don't want them to be afraid to come talk to me. I don't want them to
Mhm.
think that I don't trust them. Like, I always want to create that safe space. And similar to you, like, I had my first, he wasn't my direct manager, he was like the director, but my first leader I still talk to today in my first recruiting job. Like, he was the best leader I've really ever worked under, because he, first of all, killed it, like, was so good at what he did, led by example, but was always so approachable. Like, even earlier in my career when I was a total like bull in a china shop, like, he would take me out to lunch and have a conversation with me, but never in a way that made me feel bad. It was holding me accountable in a way that like I could receive and could hear him because I didn't feel like he was attacking me. It was like, yo, what's like chill, or like what's going on? But I think those people have a lasting impact on you, for better or worse, like I always relate back to that. And 13, 14 years later, like we're still in touch. I've talked to him and he's my first person I call for a reference. And like you said, I so want that for people that work for me. And there's a lot of people I still check in with often who have worked for me, who I haven't worked with in 5 years, because, I care about them, and hopefully they still see me as like a mentor, and they know I'll always give them a good reference. Like those relationships are important. And I think we have a responsibility to leave a positive impact on the people that are working for you.
Absolutely.
And just back to like mental health in general. I mean, if you're not in a good like headspace and you got a lot going on, like you're not going to be your best self at the
Right.
job. In any job. I mean, especially in like a sales job where like, you constantly are on the go. You got to make things happen. Like, so, life is too short to be miserable or in a place where like it's toxic. Like you got to take care of yourself and
Yeah.
get yourself right. And, it helps if you're in a place where you feel comfortable having conversations with because they're not easy conversations to have, to tell someone like,
Right.
hey, I'm not my best today, or I got some things going on.
I'm struggling.
But I think, in like our type of environment, we're a small business. So, I mean, we don't have thousands of employees, but it's like, take the time to reach out to your people, see how they're doing, see how their families are doing, like get to know like what's going on in their personal life so that you can be there for them when they need you. Because at the end of the day, like we want everyone to be successful. And we want to help them get to the position that they want to get to, continue on in their career. So, it's important to make sure that you're constantly, doing what you have to do to kind of work on yourself to get yourself in a spot that you can be your best version of who you are.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think too, like the expectation of, leave your personal life at the door is not realistic. Like I think challenging your right, like my door is
downstairs.
Upstairs in my house. my issues are downstairs. No. But I think even in general though, like expecting your team to, just come to, like Chris said, like if someone is not their best selves, then like something's going on. And why going at it as like personal life is personal life? Like you're a human being. Like certain things are too big to leave at the door, or wherever you're leaving them. And so stop putting that expectation on people, because I think that too, it just starts to build up. And if you're not letting it out and you're not prioritizing yourself, like you're going to implode. Like it's going to come out eventually. And when you hold it in for too long and you're in a place where you don't feel comfortable talking about it, like that makes it hard to really keep authentic relationships, because then you're resentful and you're angry and you're stressed, and like it just sort of snowballs. Do you know what I mean? Like if it's not that environment where people can be their real authentic selves and feel comfortable sharing when they are struggling, it's just going to end badly. Like it's just going to end badly.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Before we wrap up, I wanted to share that I was reading an article maybe a couple months ago from the New York Times, and it was saying that 60% of employees choose to stay at their current employer because they feel that they are in a healthy space mentally, and that their employers created that space for them. And it kind of shared a few points on what those companies were doing to kind of create that environment, and that company culture, from creating and fostering openness, like Chris was saying, that you have leaders that are in place that can actively listen, because there's a difference between listening and actively listening to what their employees are telling them. Education, so from the top down, from senior leadership to mid-management to teams and staff are all educated by professionals, and they have webinars and different classes and videos, ERGs, employee resource groups, that they can join and be a part of. Like there are options and that there are avenues, so that if someone in the organization is, to Chris's point before, they are going through something, either at work or personally, they have spaces and, resources that
Yeah.
they can go to. And I think that's so important. I think that, from smaller companies to larger companies, there's always something that you can do as a business owner, entrepreneur, leader, manager to help elevate your organization, because really that's what it's doing. And to Sarah's point before, you don't want to lose good people. We want to retain great people, great talent, and we have to meet them where they are.
Right.
Really, we can't set those expectations on them, our expectations, and just dump it on them and leave it there. Yeah, I think this was great. This is a great conversation. I don't think I've ever had this type of conversation before, so I'm excited. Anything else before you wrap up? Any other thoughts?
I don't think so. Just, I think in the spirit of Mental Health Month, like, take care of yourself. I know it can be a privilege sometimes to do that, like, for sure. And I feel for those who are stuck in maybe scenarios where they're really unhappy, but don't have another option at that point. But I think, you'll never regret making a decision that's going to better your mental health. And I've said this before, though, like, no matter how big a paycheck, if you believe in yourself, especially, again, specifically like a sales role, maybe it will be worth it to walk away from your best year if your mental health is in the gutter, because once you look back on that and see how far you've come, it will be so worth it. And I don't know, that's just always been my take. Like, you need to prioritize yourself and set boundaries. And if people don't respect those, then that's not a place for you to be.
Absolutely. CZ, anything?
No, that was well said. I need to start apparently reading more articles, because you guys talked about reading multiple articles. So I
Your homework for
up.
next time. You have to quote an article.
I'm happy we decided to do this. We just said, hey, let's have an honest conversation about it. And and that's what we did here. And to Sarah's point, take care of yourself. Self-care is everything. And that's it. We'll see you all for the next time.
Thank you.